Have you ever questioned why certain people enter your life and it feels less like coincidence and more like intrusion, as if the universe handcuffed your soul before you had the chance to resist? What if destiny isn't loving, but merciless? A binding contract that your unconscious signs before your conscious ever consents? When two souls collide in truth, it never feels gentle. It feels like obsession, possession, inevitability. These are the forbidden signs Carl Jung whispered through shadow and archetype. 1. The first chain. Recognition before desire. Why do women sometimes feel seen by a man they barely know? More deeply seen than by loved ones who've shared years with them. This is not ordinary attraction. It is a psychic recognition where the unconscious identifies something it has been searching for. Before desire ignites, before trust builds, there is recognition, the haunting sense of I know you when logic says they are a stranger. This moment is both exhilarating and dangerous, because while a woman may think she is choosing, often it is not choice at all. It is her unconscious recognizing and responding to a hidden pattern, a reflection of her unhealed or forgotten self. Jung called this the projection of the anima and animus, the soul's deep images. What she feels is not simply attraction, but her psyche colliding with its own archetype in human form. The conflict emerges when recognition tricks the mind into surrender too soon. Women chained by this force often overgive, silencing doubts, convincing themselves destiny demands sacrifice. They may tolerate red flags because, after all, how can you argue with what feels fated? This belief that recognition equals destiny becomes one of the deepest traps of soul-binding attraction. The consequences? One may mistake intensity for intimacy, permanence for passion. Countless women have lost themselves here, pouring devotion into men who were never capable of holding what was being projected onto them. They confuse the inner mirror with the outer man. It leads to heartbreak, self-abandonment, or worse, enmeshment without boundaries. The empowered path is not to reject recognition, but to pause inside it. Jung's guidance urges individuation, separating what is yours from what belongs to another. Recognition can be a holy invitation, but only if awareness filters it. The chain is real, but you can decide whether you carry it willingly or refuse it altogether. Think of Persephone, lured into the underworld not by force, but by a seductive seed she could not resist tasting. Recognition is that seed. It binds, but it also awakens. Picture yourself walking into a crowded room, locking eyes with someone, and instead of collapsing into the pull, you simply breathe and allow yourself to wonder, am I drawn to them, or am I drawn to the reflection of my own hidden self? Not all who feel destined are meant to stay. Some arrive only to reveal the chains you carry. And yet, something more powerful than recognition awaits, the moment where obsession deepens into a shadow grip. 2. The shadow grip, desire that feels like possession. Why does desire sometimes feel less like choice and more like something hunting you? Women often mistake this force for romance, when in truth, it is possession. The unconscious fusing with an external archetype it cannot release. This is why the bond feels unbreakable, because the attraction itself is not chosen. It is produced by shadow recognition, a psychic magnet pressing two inner wounds together. The conflict is brutal. A woman feels enraptured, unable to focus, her body betraying her with longing that refuses logic. She may obsess over messages left unread, analyze his smallest movements, or feel physically restless when he's not near. What she does not realize is that this is not pure love. It is captivity masquerading as fire. In Jungian terms, the shadow has projected itself onto the other, and the woman is chained to her own disowned desires. When she thinks about him, she is really circling around unmet hungers of her own psyche. The need for validation, safety, danger, or even rebellion. His presence activates hidden forces that she has yet to claim internally. The consequence is dependency, anxiety, or looping cycles of pursuit and withdrawal. Unawareness here breeds suffering. Many women confuse this suffocating hunger for soulmate intensity. They stay bound to men who destabilize them, mistaking chaos for passion. Their nervous system becomes addicted, mistaking adrenaline for connection. They abandon their lives, their friendships, their creativity, just to orbit around one gravitational figure. The liberation begins when she sees possession for what it is: projection demanding integration. The moment she recognizes that the irresistibility lies in her, not in him, the bindings loosen. By facing her hunger, by integrating the shadow, the chain can transform into choice. Imagine a wildfire consuming a forest. Beautiful, consuming, destructive. Desire is that wildfire when unconscious. But contained within awareness, fire becomes warmth, becomes fuel, becomes creation. Picture yourself placing your burning desire in your own hands, recognizing it as yours, not his. Feel the grip shift back into your power. The moment you claim the fire inside you, no one outside can burn you alive. But possession is only the second link in the chain. Beyond desire comes something even darker, the silent merging of identity that erodes your own boundaries. And that is where we go next. 3. The silent merger, when boundaries begin to vanish. Why is it that some women, once captured by a powerful attraction, slowly begin to disappear inside it? Not at first. In the beginning, she may retain her routines, her friendships, her sense of identity. But gradually, without confrontation, her boundaries begin melting. She says less when she feels hurt. She cancels plans to be available. She suppresses her voice just to remain desirable. This is the silent merger, where individuality surrenders to the illusion of unity. The danger of the silent merger is that it often feels noble at first. Women call it compromise, effort, devotion. But below the surface, it is self-erasure. Jung warned of this archetypal trap, projecting the self onto another human being. The unconscious whispers, "He is your completion." And once a woman internalizes this, she begins terrorizing herself with the thought of losing him. Love morphs into attachment panic. Unity becomes servitude. The real conflict? She begins to betray herself before anyone else has demanded it. She waters down her essence, numbs her instincts, and tries to fit into his expectations, or the expectations she creates in her mind. Instead of becoming more alive, she becomes smaller, defined not by who she is, but by how he responds to her. The consequences are devastating. A woman in the silent merger becomes hyper-vigilant to his moods, addicted to his attention, unable to move freely without wondering how he will perceive her. Her passion, once vibrant, dims into performance. These women often wake up years later realizing they vanished inside someone else's orbit. But individuation offers a way back. The empowered path lies in confronting the illusion. Unity with another is not possible if it demands self-erasure. True wholeness cannot be outsourced to a relationship. Jung's wisdom teaches that projection must collapse and the self must be taken back. This is how a woman reclaims her birthright of individuality, even inside intimacy. The mythological image here is Narcissus gazing into the water. But rather than loving his own reflection, the merging woman drowns in it. She becomes hypnotized by the reflection of her own needs, mirrored in another's face, forgetting that her true life exists above the waterline. Visualize yourself standing in front of a mirror, but instead of disappearing inside the glass, watch yourself step backward, expanding, regaining dimension. Feel the boundaries around you return like armor of light. Love that requires you to disappear was never love, only a hunger for control. Yet as the chain deepens, boundaries do not simply vanish, they are tested. And when tested, a darker cycle of push and pull begins that binds women to the most volatile form of intimacy. 4. The cycle of starvation and feast. Why do some relationships feel like starvation followed by a sudden feast, only to starve you again? This rhythm is not accidental. It is psychological programming. The woman trapped in this bond clings to scraps of affection because her unconscious has mistaken inconsistency for significance. The unpredictability creates obsession. She tells herself the rare moments of closeness prove he truly cares. This cycle mirrors an ancient psychological law. The nervous system attaches more strongly to intermittent rewards than consistent ones. Like a gambler at a slot machine, she stays because she hopes the next pull will finally bring the jackpot. And when it does, the rare feast of love feels more intoxicating than any steady devotion ever could. The conflict? She becomes convinced that the pain makes the joy meaningful. Women caught in this bond will describe themselves as addicted, unable to walk away even when mistreated, because the pendulum swing of rejection to affection feels like proof of destiny. Her logic may resist, but her body clings. This is the trap of trauma bonding. The ego rationalizes pain, while the nervous system chains itself to chaos. The consequence is a life dictated not by love, but by withdrawal and pursuit. Every silence feels like death. Every reunion feels like resurrection. But this cycle robs her of peace and erodes her self-worth over time. She forgets that real intimacy is not fireworks followed by famine, but a steady flame that nourishes without demand. The path of liberation begins in awareness. By naming the cycle, she weakens its hold. Jung called this bringing the unconscious to consciousness. Only then does the compulsion lose its grip. A woman must face what she is truly hungry for, not him, but the familiarity of emotional chaos. And once she sees that, she can begin to refuse the feast that keeps her starving. The cinematic metaphor here is Persephone once again. Not only was she chained to Hades, but she returned each year because part of her body craved the underworld, the famine turning every fruit of reunion into ambrosia. Until she saw the cycle, she could not ascend fully. Picture yourself sitting before an empty plate, waiting desperately for crumbs. Then imagine standing, leaving the table, and realizing outside exists a feast you can create for yourself. Addiction to inconsistency is the death of peace, yet the rebirth of power comes the moment you refuse starvation disguised as love. But cycles always escalate. Once a woman begins to resist famine, the bond turns sharper, testing her resolve. That's when the next chain appears. Control through illusion and psychological power plays. 5. Illusions of control. The mask he lets you wear. Why does a woman sometimes feel she is winning in love even as she is being undone by it? This paradox arises because control itself often becomes an illusion. She believes she has influence over his behavior, that her kindness will soften him, that her silence will make him chase, that her body, her devotion, or her patience will eventually sway him into permanence. What she does not realize is that she has been granted a mask to wear, one that comforts her ego while binding her deeper. In Jungian language, this is the projection of the hero or savior archetype. She casts herself as the redeemer, the one who will rescue the broken man, tame the wild one, heal the detached one. This role feels noble, but in truth, it comes at the cost of her freedom. For as long as she wears the mask of the one who saves, she cannot be simply the one who lives. The real conflict erupts when she invests years of her energy into this illusion, mistaking minor gestures from him as proof that her control is growing. He texts after weeks of silence, and she interprets it as a breakthrough. He admits one vulnerable truth, and she translates it as intimacy. She believes destiny is finally rewarding her patience, but in reality, she is being fed just enough to stay chained. The consequence is a slow decay of power. The mask becomes harder to remove because she begins to confuse it with her identity. Women in this bind lose the ability to discern what is truly reciprocated love versus what is their own projection. They deceive themselves, clinging to moments rather than reality. And the cost of self-deception is always higher than the cost of loss. The empowerment lies in stripping away the mask. Jung wrote of individuation as the brutal tearing down of false personas. Only when a woman sees how much of her attraction has been based on fantasy does she awaken. She realizes this truth. Control created by illusion is not control at all. It's dependency disguised as purpose. The metaphor is the marionette. She thinks she holds the strings, but in truth, the strings hold her. Every gesture of control only deepens her entanglement. Liberation comes the moment she cuts even one string, even if it means falling abruptly into discomfort. Stillness without illusion is more powerful than movement within fantasy. Picture yourself standing in front of a stage, realizing the mask you've worn has begun to suffocate you. Now imagine untying it, letting it slip to the ground, and breathing, raw, exposed, yet free for the first time. The harshest awakening is realizing you never controlled him. You were only holding onto a role. And once the mask begins to drop, something even darker emerges: betrayal, disillusionment, and the brutal confrontation with love's most primal test: abandonment. 6. The abyss of abandonment, confronting the primal wound. Why does the chain of soul-binding attraction feel unbearable the moment abandonment enters? Because behind every obsession, behind every projection, lies the primal wound, the terror of being left, unseen, discarded. This fear is not about the man. It existed long before him. What he awakens merely echoes childhood pains, forgotten griefs, and unmet needs. The unconscious mind dreads abandonment so severely that it reacts as though survival itself is at stake. Women caught here may stay in degrading relationships just to avoid silence. They tolerate disrespect because the panic of being left burns hotter than the discomfort of being mistreated. Jung would call this the activation of the child archetype, the vulnerable, unhealed self still searching for safety through another's presence. The conflict becomes soul-shattering. A woman chained by abandonment fears enters cycles of begging, pleading, texting, apologizing for things that are not her fault. She works tirelessly to keep connection alive even when it has become poisonous. To be abandoned feels like annihilation. It is not just the rejection of love, but the rejection of existence itself. The consequence? This primal terror robs her of dignity. It hurls her into humiliating patterns where she crawls back to dynamics that destroy her spirit. She becomes incapable of walking away because her body interprets solitude as death. The price of avoiding abandonment is a slow bleeding of her soul, but individuation transforms this abyss into initiation. Jung taught that the soul grows strongest where the wound lies deepest. By confronting abandonment, instead of fearing it, a woman discovers that solitude is not annihilation, but resurrection. She recognizes that she does not disintegrate when left alone. She expands. The myth here is Psyche, who had to complete impossible tasks alone after losing her lover's trust. Her despair nearly consumed her, but in walking through the abyss of her own pain, she unearthed godlike strength. The abyss tests, but it also births. Visualize yourself sitting in a cold, empty room, believing you've been stripped of everything. And then, slowly, you feel your own heartbeat. Steady, resilient, eternal. Realize that even in abandonment, you are never abandoned by yourself. That truth cannot be taken. Only when you survive the silence of abandonment do you realize you were the source of music all along. And as this abyss is crossed, a transformation begins. Love stops being the prison and becomes a mirror. But before liberation arrives, there is yet a heavier truth. The chain doesn't end at abandonment. It turns inward, forcing every woman to confront her own betrayal of self. 7. The betrayal of self. The final chain. Why does the most destructive suffering and soul-binding love not come from him, but from her own betrayal of herself? Because no external abandonment can devastate as profoundly as the slow abandonment of one's own truth, instincts, and essence. The real prison is not being chained to another man's archetype. It is the moment a woman silences her own voice to preserve a bond that thrives on her silence. This betrayal often begins subtly. She tells herself, "It's just one compromise." She ignores the text that broke her heart, minimizes the lie she caught, dismisses the unease her intuition screams inside her stomach. To maintain the illusion of love, she betrays herself one small choice at a time. Over days, weeks, years, these tiny silences accumulate until she looks in the mirror and no longer recognizes the woman staring back. The conflict here is brutal because she convinces herself she is loyal. She calls it devotion, sacrifice, even destiny. But every unspoken truth is a dagger turned inward. Every moment she shrinks to accommodate his presence is a fracture within her soul. Jung's core principle of individuation teaches that the psyche is designed to push toward wholeness, and when she betrays herself repeatedly, her unconscious retaliates with depression, anxiety, or even illness. The denied truth always seeks revenge. The consequences of this betrayal can manifest as apathy, loss of passion, or even disdain toward the very man she chained herself to. But the deepest wound is internal. She loses respect for herself. And once self-respect erodes, every connection built upon it collapses into resentment. She becomes both prisoner and jailer within her own psyche. The empowered path is the most dangerous, but also the most liberating, breaking the cycle by betraying him before betraying herself again. This betrayal is not cruelty, it is survival. It is the moment she finally dares to honor what her soul already knows. Jung would call this confrontation the refusal to allow shadow to dominate light any longer. The metaphor here is Pandora's box. For so long she fears opening it, thinking all the horrors will escape. But the truth is this: once she dares to open the box, after despair and chaos come forth, hope remains. Only when she betrays the false bond does she rediscover the seed of her real self. Picture yourself standing at a locked door, holding the key you've carried all along. Imagine placing it into the lock, not hesitating, and stepping out from the prison you built with silence. Outside waits a horizon untouched by compromise. The deepest betrayal in love is not his disloyalty to you. It is your disloyalty to yourself. And once this realization strikes, something miraculous unfolds. The chains that once imprisoned her no longer hold the same power. soul recognition becomes not captivity, but initiation. That brings us to the final truth, the transformation of bondage into sovereignty. 8. The alchemy of chains, turning fate into power. Why do some women emerge from soul-binding love shattered, while others rise from the same fire as sovereign beings? The difference lies in alchemy, the art of transforming wounds into wisdom, chains into strength, desire into destiny. The same force that enslaves can also initiate if she refuses to remain a victim of unconscious projection and instead chooses individuation as her path. At the core of Jung's psychology lies this paradox: what enslaves you is also your teacher. The man who consumed her was never just a man. He was the embodiment of her unclaimed shadow, her unacknowledged hunger, her abandonment wound, her love-starved archetypes. When she faces each of these without flinching, his power dissolves. What felt like fate consuming her alive reveals itself as her psyche demanding completion. The conflict women face here is the fear of emptiness after release. They ask, who am I without this bond? Who am I without the fire, the chaos, the haunting pull? The terror of emptiness tempts many back into chains, and yet it is precisely in emptiness that alchemy takes root. For when she no longer orbits him, she begins to orbit her own essence. The longing, once projected outward, becomes fuel for creating her own wholeness. The consequences of resisting alchemy are cyclical tragedy. Without this transformation, she repeats the same dynamic with a new face, a new man, a new chain. Different bodies, same wound. But when the alchemy is accepted, the cycle ends. She reclaims her authority, not by scorning love, but by recognizing she was always the axis of it. The metaphoric image here is the blacksmith's forge. Chains are heated, beaten, reformed. Under fire and pressure, the same iron that once bound becomes the sword she now wields. This is individuation, uniting shadow and light, recognizing projection, reclaiming power. Picture yourself standing with the broken remnants of your chains at your feet. Now watch them glow in your hands, reshaped into a weapon of clarity, an anchor of strength. Feel the paradox? The very pain that shackled you has become the fire that forged you. The fire that once imprisoned you now answers only to your command. And with that, she no longer fears recognition, desire, merger, or abandonment. Love is no longer a battlefield, but an altar, and fate, once a chain, becomes the crown she places upon herself. Quick recap of truths. 1. Recognition before desire. A stranger's face ignites a memory older than your body, not attraction, but the unconscious whispering, home. Yet home can be a mirror of wounds, not destiny. 2. The shadow grip. Desire hunts like a predator disguised as love. Your hunger is not for him, but for the parts of yourself you abandoned. Obsession is possession until the fire becomes your own. 3. The silent merger boundaries melt, not through force, but through surrender. Love cloaks itself in devotion while you disappear. To be chosen should never cost your existence. 4th, starvation and feast. He withholds, then offers crumbs that taste like immortality. Your nervous system chains itself to inconsistency. Chaos is not passion. It is captivity. 5. Illusions of control. You wear the mask of savior, mistaking fantasy for power, but every mask carved for him steals breath from you. Control that depends on him was never yours at all. 6th abyss of abandonment. The terror of emptiness haunts more than his absence. To be left feels like death because the child in you still begs. Yet alone in the abyss, the soul finally resurrects. 7. betrayal of self. The slowest death is silencing your own instinct. Every softened maybe becomes self-sacrifice, rotting in silence. The cruelest betrayal was never his. It was your own. 8. Alchemy of chains. Chains crack in the forge of awareness. Pain melts into sword, shadow into sovereignty. What once imprisoned becomes the crown you wear. So now, all 8 truths circle like spirits around you. Recognition, desire, merger, famine, illusion, abandonment, betrayal, transformation. Each one is not an enemy. Each one is a teacher wearing a dangerous mask. They do not arrive to destroy you, but to pull you into the fire where soul becomes sovereign. This journey is not about men, not about love, not even about loss. It is about the forgotten empire within you that too often bowed, silenced, surrendered, just to be chosen. But the deeper secret is this: the soul was never meant to beg. It was meant to reign. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." The chain, the fire, the famine, none of these were fate. They were your unconscious trying to find its voice. Now you have heard it. So what happens next? You could return to the mask, to the cycle, to the silent hunger the world calls love. Or you could step into the raw cathedral of your own essence, alone yet infinite, unchosen yet sovereign. Your silence isn't weakness. It's the opening of a deeper vow, the vow to never lose yourself again in the reflection of another face. When you are ready, descend further. Subscribe to Jung Mind, where your shadow speaks and your soul finally listens. And before you go, let this last question haunt you like a mirror you cannot turn away from. What part of you is still willing to burn? Just to keep someone else warm?